So glad to have you joining us once again for Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So we spent some time last episode talking about stress and that not all stresses are created equal. And we don't want to get too deep down the stress rabbit hole, but we do want to talk about it in the lead off for this episode because as we have been discussing, stress is a major eroder when you are trying to live your life and have a sustainable future. And Gary, you are in the utility world and sustainability is a buzzword. And I want you to hit on that for just a moment. We won't go too deep into to the definition as it applies to our environment, but just kind of where is that word in the general scheme of things right now for just the American populace?
Well, I think we're looking and trying to figure out as the world, not just Americans or utilities, as to what is sustainable. And energy is so important to everything that we do. Then, how do we develop sustainable energy? And so the word has come to mean, how do we take care of future generations by not releasing so much carbon from fossil fuels that we make the world unsustainable? And so that's a definition that has become part of the vernacular. Sustainability at the simplest root means, is this something that can continue forever in its current state? Is it sustainable? Is the amount of work involved in maintaining or operating this thing worth the outcome that you're getting, right? And so how do we apply that to our own lives?
Well, I know on one hand, it might seem like a leap between talking about sustainability and the environment and personal sustainability, but I think it is a topic that we really need to consider and to dig a little bit deeper because we like to just go ahead and do our lives, live our life as if there are not going to be impedances or there are not going to be, pitfalls that we stumble into, but that's just not practical. We live in a world that there are all hosts of problems, relational, environmental, physical, health, fill in the blank. There are lots and lots of problems that can detour you as you are walking your journey. And so there will be certain points in that journey that it's no longer sustainable to keep on going the way that you've been going.
Yeah, and again, that applies to relationships. It applies to your own processes, and I know that's an engineering term, but or a business term, but the processes that you have in your life need to be sustainable. If they're not, then you're spending a lot of work or stress or resiliency, as we talked about a couple episodes ago, on that process or that relationship. And so, what do we need to watch for as we try to have sustainable lives? Parts of that is we all have limited resources. Are we being good stewards of those resources? Are we being good stewards of our time? Are we being good stewards of our money, of other things? Is that sustainable? It's not sustainable to spend $2,000 a month when you only make $1,000 a month. And that's probably a really good illustration of the word sustainable because you can't do that forever. You can do it for a season, you can do it for a short period of time, but you can't do it forever. And the way I think about sustainability is, what are those things that I'm doing that are not sustainable?
Well, and you bring up time. If you are somebody who has 5 meetings a day, online, in person, and you really only have time for 4, there's going to be a point at which either you get overwhelmed personally, your company becomes dissatisfied with your performance, you disappoint team members. I mean, there could be lots of negative consequences when you don't appropriately budget time. And so, as you say, you can carry on for a season or for a cycle maybe, but there becomes a point when it is no longer sustainable. You cannot keep up with the demand, whether it be time or finances, etc. It's going to take its toll.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. My first meeting was this morning at 6:30 because we have 4 time zones in our company of people distributed around the country. So not only Pacific, Mountain, and Eastern, but now we've got, there's Atlantic, which is one more past Eastern. And so, my first meeting's at 6:30 this morning, and my last meeting's at 5:30 this afternoon. Is that sustainable? Well, for 4 years it has been, right? Is that sustainable forever? Now, and the other problem that I run into is filling every single hour with meetings. So there's no time for doing the action items that I accumulate in the meetings. There's no time for reflection. There's no time for research. I just go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. Is that sustainable?
For a very short period of time.
Well, and one can argue it's sustainable for a period of time. But at what point do you then say, okay, look, this is my sustainable week. Here is my week that, okay, I have a certain number of breaks. I can eat during the day at some point, which I haven't done today, by the way. I have a certain amount of travel time. I have passing periods. I have times for reflection. I have times for thinking about the future. I have times. How often do we intentionally sit down and look at our week and say, okay, here's my standing meetings. Here's the meetings that are kind of my ad hoc, kind of meetings that I'm in right now. We're in one right now together that's a marketing meeting that's twice a week for 2 hours, right? There's 4 hours. That's 10% of our week right off the bat. But how often do we sit down and look at our week and say, what is sustainable and what is not? And how often do we mark that out? Stephen Covey, that we brought him up before, he says, you've got to have time, you've got to practice time blocking. So how much of the week, let's go through my week Monday through Friday, and preferably you do this beforehand, and you say, you put the big blocks in. And his whole thing, and he talks about big rocks versus, your sand and pebbles. If things are really, you say family is important, then go through and put in some big chunks of time for family and block it out. Now you may have to move it, but at least it's in there. And then all the other stuff will fill in. And that was his point. So if you've got two major projects at work, and you've got family, and you've got one other thing that, recreation, whatever you want to call it, put those big rocks in first, and then let the rest of the stuff filter in. What we often do, though, is we approach our day by getting up in the morning, getting our cup of coffee, and then, commuting into an office or opening up your laptop, and you start looking at emails. Those emails, one could argue, are not your big rocks. Those are other people's priorities that may or may not be important. And so how can we, from a sustainability standpoint, how can we manage our time, since you brought up time first?
Well, I think about some specific career fields that I have great concern about their sustainability. And two that come to mind immediately are nurses and teachers. So during the height of the pandemic, my sister is a nurse, and I have a very good friend who's a nurse. And the sheer volume of patients they were seeing and the severity of illness, the pressure was unbelievable on the medical staff. And I was hearing statements like, I didn't have time to go to the bathroom during a 12-hour shift. Not only is that not okay for your long term, it's probably not that great in your short term. And you do that a couple days in a row, you can end up with bladder infections, a whole host of physical problems where you're just out completely. You can no longer serve your patients because you have now fallen victim to your body collapsing on itself for not having had margin. It was not sustainable. And I think about teachers, especially those that are working in environments where they've got very, very heavy numbers of students in their classroom. They've got maybe 30 or 32 students any given year. And it might be sustainable for a year or two, but it becomes so taxing that we are seeing a lot of educators hanging it up and saying, this isn't for me anymore. I'm going to let somebody else come in behind me. I'm looking for a new career field. And so again, sustainable for a time, but not for the long haul. And so how do we have some sort of a support network, some sort of a helps opportunity for the careers that are just absolutely being bombarded, where they cannot sustain the present course of action?
So my mind goes straight, and those are great comments. My mind goes straight to the systems, right? How do we create sustainable systems out of unsustainable circumstances? And so, there's a reason why every time you're on an airplane, they say, put your mask on first before you put your child's on. If you're a caregiver, if you're a nurse, if you're a teacher, if you're not putting your own mask on first, if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not breathing in to breathe out, it's not sustainable. And how do we build a system around those careers, those people as individuals that is sustainable? And there are people who can run for 12 hours and actually get off on the adrenaline rush of being the emergency room nurse comes to mind. But there's others that are like, no, that's not how that's not sustainable for me. And I need to take a certain amount of breaks. I need to have a certain patient load, etc. And how do we set up systems around those folks? One of the first things I look at in those systems is what are those people doing that is not what we need them to do, that we can take off their plates, so that they are doing only what the statement of how do we get them in a situation where they are doing what only they can do,
Right.
and take those tasks off of them, whether it be paperwork or other things that allow them to do what only they can do, and have other support people around them. So since we have a shortage of nurses, a shortage of teachers, a shortage of those things, what can we do to take activities and tasks off of their plates so that we can go back to some form of sustainability?
Yeah. And, I'm certainly not sitting here thinking I have answers to any of this, but I do believe that as we go through this journey of curiosity, not hungry, excuse me, let's try that again. Curiosity, not judgment.
You haven't eaten today.
Well, I have. I've got it. I told you my other podcast is, around that other theme. But curiosity, not judgment, as we go through that concept, how do we begin to ask some of these questions and pose maybe some working theories? How do we have conversations with leaders or those people of influence that can help maybe alter a system? How do we genuinely be curious about making a difference in the lives of these people that are so critical to our health and well-being?
So, and I think that the key to that is just what you said is, what can we do? What can I do? And I think that's the key, because we can't, unfortunately, in my experience, let me start over. In my experience, it doesn't work to say you should be doing something different. Right? We can't go to hospital administrators or, doctors or others and say, you need to fix this, right? I think we have to do is say, okay, what can I do, right? What can I do as I interface with the medical profession, as I have a friend or two who are nurses? What can I do to provide support and help? And so I told you about a situation where we saw, we came into contact with some foster parents. And so, we weren't in a situation in our lives where we could become foster parents, but what could we do? There's a thing called a respite, where you can go and then take the kids away so that they can have a little bit of a break.
Yes.
And be able to do what they can only do, which is being foster parents. We can take those kids for the weekend and give them a bit of a break so it is sustainable for them. So I guess it always comes back to, when you're looking at a situation, what can I do to help? But also, you're not in a position to looking for others if you're not being sustainable with yourself.
Exactly. You had mentioned last episode a graph or a questionnaire that allowed for some self-reflection on stress points. And I believe the higher the score, the more stressors you have in your life.
That's right.
And so we stumbled upon it, or at least a version of it, and I'm going to link it in the show notes, and you're welcome to check it out. So this particular version has 43 questions, and it gives a point value. And again, based on your total, if you have, 150 or less points, relatively low stress. If you're 300 or more, you are in trouble. My words, not theirs. But some of the questions or some of the inflection points for stress you would expect things like death of a spouse, death of a child. But there's other things that maybe are not so obvious. Arguments with in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe that's become commonplace and you don't even think about that anymore. It's just the way that life operates in your circle. But there are certain things on this list that were interesting. One seemed to be a positive, and yet it was rated as a stressor, outstanding personal achievement.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something. Personal experience and watching others. When you have an outstanding personal achievement, there's a tremendous amount of pressure. It's like the author that writes a bestseller and is then, okay, well, now when's your next one? It's like an artist that has a best-selling hit, a number one, chart topper. What's your next one? I mean, personal achievement, there are many, and I would put myself in this category in certain areas of my life. I don't want to do well where the expectation is set that I'm going to continue to do well because I don't have the time to dedicate to that. It's not sustainable. There's a reason why I only play golf every once in a while at charity events with friends when I know I'm not going to be expected to perform, because the time it takes to perform at golf is not something I choose to do.
I somehow thought you were going to say, because I'm so good at golf.
No. I'm a double bogey at best on a good day. But the point is, I could get better. I've had times in my life where I said, I wonder if I play a few times, a month, I could get better. And I do, but it's not worth it, right? And so, but the point back to achievement is, that's not a surprise to me, because that personal achievement means there's going to be an expectation, a bar set that you are always going to be at that level. And if you've written a Pulitzer Prize piece as a journalist, there's a lot of pressure on you. There's a lot of stress that's involved in that. By the way, being in the limelight, being paid attention to, wondering if you deserve it, whether I can see a lot of stress in that.
Yeah.
But the point of a questionnaire like this, and we're looking at this on Birga's laptop, is that the point is to add up all the things. I mean, because the ones at the bottom are vacation.
Right.
That seems like a good one. For a lot of people, that's a lot of stress to be on vacation.
And it's
to
the
plan it,
yeah.
the planning of it, the implementing of it. Did we have a good time? I have a certain expectation for rest and relaxation, or doing great stuff, or having a great time, or blah blah blah. Did it meet that expectation?
Right.
A lot of this has to do with expectations and were they met? And that's another part of sustainability. Are we setting expectations for ourselves that are realistic and then can be met? And I think a lot of people don't achieve in their lives because they're afraid of setting a goal that they won't meet, and the stress involved in not meeting a goal.
Yep. I'll tell you a 45-second vacation stress story. Went on a group vacation with several families that we love and have traveled with often. We together rented a $1 million+ home on the beach in California. Get there, bed bugs. That changed everything. And it went from, we've got this gorgeous house on the beach, to we're all gonna die.
Yeah.
I mean, not really thinking that extreme, but it changed everything. And it was nothing but stress for the rest of the trip.
Sure. And those things can happen. And talk about resiliency. How did you respond? How did you recover? Right. And do you have a plan B? And what can you do in those situations? But I think that the whole curiosity and judgment thing around sustainability is, are my life processes, the way I plan my time, the way I plan my resources, the way I handle stress in my life, is it sustainable?
Right. All right, so what we're referencing, it's called the Holmes Ray Life Stress Inventory. You probably cannot see it. We had it printed. It's a 43 question value system. And so let's say somebody goes through this and scores extraordinarily high, which is a negative, right? This is not one where you want to get high points. This is one where you want low points. So how do we...
I won.
How do we begin to take a look at this to see, okay, I've got stuff going on that is putting me in maximum stress categories. This is not sustainable. How do we begin the journey of eliminating stress points?
Well, and this is the hard part, because we tend to set our lives up of what we think is the right way, and then when someone says no, you have to change it, you don't usually react well, right? And so now we're getting into the whole concept of change and change management, and not doing status quo. Sometimes we're in relationships that are just not sustainable. It takes too much time, it takes too much effort, it drains us. We don't have the time for that kind of a sustainable relationship. Or we just have too many relationships. Or, they talk about in business, getting back to that, a span of control. Can you have 850 employees? Is that sustainable? So,
can you have 400 emails a day?
Is that right? Is that sustainable? And I think that if it's not, then we have to start saying, okay, what can I do to change that? And then you're back to the motivational interviewing, which is, number one, how motivated am I to change this? And then the second question is, what do I think the chances are that I actually can change this part of my life? And that was invented for smoking, but with anything in your life. And what's amazing to me about this list, and we keep coming back to it because it's sitting in front of us, is, it starts with major holidays. In other words, did you celebrate Christmas this year? Well, most of us did. So, but the point of the thing is, at what point do you need to make a change? At what point is the pain of not making a change going to be higher than the point of changing? And so what are we going to do here about the level of stress in our lives? And that's why it's adding up the scores. So if you've had the death of a spouse, which happened to me a couple of years ago, then what are you going to do about the rest of the list? And what are you going to do to stop, pause, reflect on how you can take care of yourself so that you don't start a disease process, so that you don't alienate yourself from everybody around you in your closest circle and all your relationships. That's the key, because the outcome of these levels of stress are not good.
So let me ask if I'm interpreting this correctly, what you're saying. So you mentioned death of a spouse. So that's a score value of 100.
Right there at the top.
Yeah, the most stressful on this particular scale. A little further down the list is changes in residence. So if you have had the death of a spouse,
don't sell your house.
If you can avoid it.
If you can avoid it. Now, if you just can't live in the house because this was the house that you and your spouse bought, look, there's always trade-offs here. But the recommendation or the guideline, according to this, is don't change your other relationships, don't change your resident, don't change your job, because those are stressors that will add to that stress that are unsustainable.
So some interesting things to consider, and again, I will link this web address into the stress notes if you'd like to take a look at this kind of survey, this life stress inventory. But again, it's called the Holmes Ray Life Stress Inventory. And if you've got some of the top 10 or 15, which are the high point value stressors, take a good look at the ones at the bottom 10 or 15 to see, is there anything in there that I can avoid jumping into? Because I just don't have the bandwidth right now. It is not sustainable for me to absorb all of these stressors and keep functioning.
That's number one. Number two, I would submit, is get help. And that's getting help from others is a big deal out of this. And it's one of the things I had to do when I sustained number one and a couple of others on here. And the third thing I would say is, and most of the people that you get help from, or the resources you get help from, will recommend this, and that is, what can you do to alleviate the stress, take care of the stress, reduce the stress, and eliminate the stress in your life. So meditation, pick up a hobby, go out with friends,
Exercise.
read. Exercise is a big one. There's a huge amount of data that says that if you're under extreme stress, working out, even if it's just a simple 10 minutes a day walk, is a big deal. And if you can combine them, and those of us with limited time always look for these, if you can combine a walk with a friend so you can talk while you get exercise, touchdown.
Yeah.
Because that's the key, is with your limited resources, including time, what can you do to alleviate these very things that are stress? So 1, what can you do to eliminate other stressors? 2, get help. 3, what do you do about the stress? Because there's all kinds, and there's books that are written on this about what you can do to okay, I've got a high stress level. What can I do? Can I meditate? Go for a walk? Whatever all those things are.
Yeah, very good. All right. As always, we appreciate your comments, your feedbacks. If you've had some things that you have implemented into your life that have been very helpful, let us know, let the audience know. Feel free to make that note in the comments. You can, of course, always catch up with us on our website, which is curiositynotjudgment.com. Got it right that time. And until next week, we hope you have a very good one.
And the question of this week is, what in your life is sustainable and what is not, and what are you going to do about it?
All right, little homework. We'll see you next time.
Take care.